success is not necessarily what you get, it's actually what you do.
What does responsible innovation look like?
I don't even like the term burnout. I'm trying to, if you're out there, please stop using it. Like the whole world needs to stop using that term, because the right term is fulfillment. When somebody doesn't understand you, it's your fault. And that's a very hard concept for leaders to accept.
Welcome back to CEO Behind the Scenes. I'm Lara Necessian, and today we're talking about a form of leadership you don't often see up close. Leadership that's tested on the front line long before it's ever practiced in the boardroom. My guest is Dr. Imamu Tomlinson, a practicing emergency physician and CEO of Vituity, one of the largest physician-owned partnerships in the United States. He also leads Inflect Health, a venture arm helping bring next-generation healthcare innovation into real clinical environments. His story is not just about healthcare transformation. It's about adversity, resilience, and what it means to lead with authenticity when people are counting on you in the most vulnerable moments of their lives. Dr. Tomlinson, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you. And where I really wanted to start this conversation with is I've often heard you speak about the fact that leadership is not something that's just constructed from the top. It's actually formed through adversity. I'm wondering if you can take us back to that turning point that shaped the way that you lead today.
Oh, wow. How far do you want to go back? Yeah. But, I think if you look at leadership, I think leadership is, in some ways, leadership development is overrated. I think we often look for the 7 ways, or the 10 highly effective ways that people can be leaders. But the truth is that leadership is forged, and it's usually forged through adversity. It's usually forged through what people are going through in their lives. And I know for me personally, I don't feel like I fit any of the boxes for a leader. But when I look back at my experiences, they definitely forged me in a way that has made me a better leader.
And you had a personal experience earlier on in your career that almost could have ended your career in the medical profession. Could you speak to how that experience really shaped your resiliency, your leadership, the way that you lead today?
Unfortunately, I've had a few different, sort of career-ending or life-ending events. I think one that's probably one of the toughest ones for me was being on fire in medical school. I actually was in a house fire, and I was in my last year of medical school. Burned about 20% of my body, and at that point in time, I didn't know if I'd finish. I didn't know if I would finish medical school and what would happen. But, after going through that, it took about 6-8 weeks to start to feel a little bit better, to start to not be in the most amazing pain you can ever imagine. But when I look at my life now and I look at situations now, my gratitude, the things that I look forward to are much different when you compare them to being on fire. So I think that, adversity always gives us a sense of gratitude. It gives us a sense of the opportunity and the duty and responsibility we have when we are in those leadership moments.
I could only imagine just how life-altering an incident like that really could be. And when you are able to get through that kind of adversity, it's inevitable that it leaves a lasting impact on who you are as a person. And a lot of CEOs, they do tend to lead more from a distance. And I know you said earlier you don't fit into any of the leadership boxes, but from what I understand, you are still practicing medicine whilst acting as the CEO and being the CEO of such a large organization. Talk to me about that and how really still being on the front line impacts the way that you lead and show up.
Maybe one of the most frustrating things in the world is people who teach or coach but have never done. I think that's, you think that how frustrating that is for somebody to say, I know how to do this when they've never done it. At Vituity, we believe that if you're going to tell people what to do, you can't ask people to do things you wouldn't be able or be willing to do yourself. And so for us, all of our executives have worked on those front lines currently while we're making those decisions. So we can take patients and also the people providing care into account. I think that the biggest thing that it does by being closer to the patient, to the client, so to speak, is it gives you a healthy respect for the decisions you're making.
And how does that work from a practical perspective? Because I imagine there is a fine line when you're working on the front line to then needing the capacity to be in the position of CEO. You're making so many different decisions every single day. You're handling a lot of pressure. You've got so much responsibility. You've got people that are really counting on you in so many different ways. How do you find that balance between being practical, being on the front line, and then actually being able to take a step back and really lead?
Let's see, we're talking about balance, and I don't believe in balance, at all. I think that everywhere I'm at, anything that I'm doing, I want to be present in that moment. Like this moment, I'm present with you, and I'm going to, give 187% effort into this moment. I think, one of the things that my superpower, I call different qualities your superpowers, is relentlessness. And I think that, it's my responsibility to enhance my leadership and my thinking and my strategy by being involved in the front line and being involved at that moment. I don't necessarily see them as separate. I don't want to be that kind of leader that has to go up on the hill or to the 27th floor or to some retreat in Boca to be able to think. The best way I think is when I'm with the people. Best way I think is when I'm with the patients, because I get direct feedback on things I may want to do. And honestly, even just when you are being strategic, if you ask patients and employees about a crazy idea, they're going to give you immediate feedback, right? It may not be the one you want, but it'll also give you information so that you can adjust what you're thinking about strategically.
I'm curious to know, it seems like you really, when you said you really haven't listened to any sort of leadership framework in the way that you lead, I'm really seeing this play out through just this conversation alone. What gave you the confidence to be able to lead in a way that is so authentic and true to you and not necessarily go by what the textbooks tell you to do?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say part of my confidence comes from being Jamaican. So that I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for. But no, seriously, I think that I wouldn't call it confidence. I think you said it best in that sort of second part of the question, which is authenticity. I'm not the right person to be the CEO of Vituity. I never was. And so, I had a coach that told me that the chances of me being a CEO were less than 1%, so much so that I wrote a book about it. Because oftentimes we look for the wrong things. We put people in boxes. We assume that there's a right way to be a CEO. There's a right strict set of qualities that are necessary. And I think for me, what I learned through this journey, the reason I am confident is that, about 5 years ago, I decided, there are things that are great about Mu and there are things that are not so great. But at the end of the day, I have to be me. And my team, my employees, the rest of the partnership, they expect me to be me. And they know that when I'm Mu, I'm delivering the highest level of performance possible. If you're hiding behind a screen or if you're trying to be someone different than you are, you're losing energy from, what is 100% your authentic self.
And when you speak to this concept of less than 1%, what does that really represent for you?
Yeah, I mean, I told you my coach, I asked him, he said, I don't think you can be a CEO. And I asked him for the percentages, the chances that I could be. And he said, well, it's less than 1%. So I hold grudges and I use that term. But that term is really focused on all the different ways we build boxes for people, right? And, we have all these, we talked about, the Stephen Covey's and highly, effective habits, the habits of highly effective people. And we miss opportunities for people to not have those habits that we think are amazing. So, for example, I don't sleep. I don't know if I should recommend that for everybody that's listening today, but I don't sleep. It's something that I use that time to get ahead. That's not a typical strategy that somebody would espouse. I wouldn't sell many books saying that. But again, that's just one aspect. I think introversion, I think Malcolm Gladwell writes a lot about dyslexia and how a lot of CEOs that he interviewed use their dyslexia as an advantage instead of a disadvantage. And so, my hope is that people that are listening to this or listening to me understand that less than 1% framework is about let's not pick the winners and losers of the race before the race is even run.
A lot of people would take a comment that's made to them like your chances of succeeding, your chances of being appointed a CEO position are less than 1%, and they would take that to heart and make it mean that that's not possible for them. But it almost seems like you utilize this being underestimated to prove people wrong. Where does that internal fire come from?
Yeah, I love that you use the term fire because I feel like my base energy is anger, to be honest with you. It's what fuels me. It's what gets me going. And you're right. I mean, if he'd have said there was 96% chance you'd be a CEO, I probably wouldn't be one today. But the fact that he didn't think I could do it was energetic to me. I think that stems from, as we get a little older, we learned a lot about ourselves. And my first instinct is to be disagreeable. I think there's sort of 3 tenets to disruption, and disagreeableness is that first one. And what people think, it's disagreeableness is not just being upset or angry or not being a good team player. It's really about not accepting the status quo. When he said less than 1%, he gave me a status quo, and I immediately wanted to break that. The other 2 tenets of disruption are optimism and relentlessness. And so those 3 things don't always go together, disagreeableness and optimism. But once he said less than 1%, I knew that I wanted to prove him wrong. But more than that, I knew that I could have an impact on the world greater than he ever believed. And I was relentless enough to try to make that happen.
Speaking about leadership and speaking about belief in people, I do want to switch gears just a little bit. And there is so much hype about innovation in healthcare, whether we're talking about AI, apps, virtual care, but very little of that is the reality of what clinicians are actually feeling and seeing, which goes back to what you said earlier around that intel that you're getting on the front line is so valuable. I'm wondering, how have you utilized that to then drive innovation in a way that actually works for you, your people, and the organization?
Yeah, that's an amazing question because the question itself implies that innovation comes from a place different from where the work is. And I think that's what we're seeing. We have a lot of people who are really smart, especially with AI, et cetera, who are coming up with solutions to problems that they don't really understand because they're not doing that work. So I think for me, I flip it. All the innovations that we have at Vituity, you talked about Inflect Health earlier, which is our venture arm where we spin up small companies. All of those problems that we're solving come from the front lines. We're not creating something in some lab somewhere. So a great example of that is Rely Health. And in Rely Health, we navigate patients through the tumult and the convolution of receiving care using both AI, but also in person and tele. And so we're able to navigate that patient through healthcare. We have another product called Savant, which is not just a language model that creates a chart for physicians, but it also gives help with differential diagnoses and making sure that they're creating a chart that is both defensible and that can be billed appropriately. And so I think that the idea that innovation comes from somewhere else and then you layer it on to the problem, we see it as reverse. Innovation comes from the front lines, and both of those companies were born out of a problem that needed to be solved at the front line. That we then apply resources to help, scale that problem solver at a different level.
And when you're talking about Inflect Health and the fact that this is a different kind of model, it's not just about capital, it's about that connection to clinicians. What makes that pairing so powerful?
It reminds me of, the mom and pop, family businesses, right? You think, if you look at the level of innovation and resource efficiency, it comes from those companies that, where the mom and pop just have their little setup or little shop, right? That's where the most innovation comes from. And so I think that that's what we're seeing is that, we don't have to build bigger or invest more when we actually have the people that can solve those problems that are actually generating the solutions. A lot of them are really those MVPs, those minimal viable products, right? They're in some ways bootstrapped a solution that then once that solution takes on, we can test it in other places. I know we mentioned earlier about Vituity, but Vituity is in 27 states. We took care of 14 million patients last year. We're in over 900 communities, depending on how you count a community. But so when you get an idea, the ability to quickly turn it around into something that's just minimally viable, but to test it with the people who are doing the work, that's really, that's harkens back to that mom and pop business where you can test things quickly. And if they're not working, you can stop them. But if they are working, you can scale them really quick.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering from your perspective, what does responsible innovation look like when the stakes are so high? We're often talking about life and death situation in the context of healthcare. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, you can't fail when you're dealing with a person's life, right? So innovation, you have to be really, really careful. And I think, when you look at trials and, sort of medical trials and even, medical equipment trials, that innovation is slow on purpose, right? Because you want to make sure that you test it in safe situations before you apply it to patients. But I do think that even in regard to that, you can be bold and you can get to situations where you test them in environments that are safe. But I'm not a skeptic. I remember the second tenet of optimism. And so I'm optimistic that, we can do it in safe environments, that we can quickly get those innovations when they're safe to patients.
And I'm wondering if you could share with us where you've seen innovation or an example of when you've seen this go from a concept to then a real impact for a patient or a provider.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about Reliance Savant, but I'll change gears. I'll talk about something that isn't tech-based to give you an example of what innovation should be. And I think that's the challenges we're always talking about innovation in respect to AI and tech. But innovation is just thinking differently. Innovation is disrupting the status quo, as we talked about earlier. So we have a model, we call it rapid medical evaluation. It's a model in the emergency department that really takes patients and sees them faster. And I'll explain a little bit. If you look at a typical ER today, they have a process called triage, which actually is from the French word for sorting. And it's from a battlefield. Like the idea of triage is from the battlefield where you take sicker patients first and you take non-sick patients and kind of make them wait. So if you go to a local emergency department, if you don't have rapid medical evaluation, you'll see some patients just waiting because they're not that sick. So we kind of flip that on its head. Instead of seeing patients in sequence, taking the sickest patients first and leaving others to wait, we decided to take care of patients in parallel. So we just allocated different resources for different patients. So if you came in with your earache or if you came in with your laceration, you were seen by a different set of resources than the ones you would be seen if you were in a car accident or having a heart attack. that was an innovation that we came up with that didn't require any tech, didn't require any AI. It was probably before AI in the terms we see it today. But it really was about thinking differently, challenging the status quo, and really flipping a process on its head to come out with a better outcome. It's at the part of of what we do. Kind of change gears a little bit to answer this in another way. I do a podcast, Less Than 1%. And on my podcast, I have so many different people from different places. I have athletes and entertainers and musicians and people in healthcare and doctors and lawyers. And I even have a cartoonist. And people are like, Moo, what are you thinking? You're a healthcare CEO. Why are you doing a podcast and having all these different people? And I said, the solutions in healthcare are not going to come from healthcare. They're going to come from all kind of amazing people that have solved weird problems that we never even thought were solvable. And if we can talk to those people and find out what makes them tick, we're going to make healthcare better in that process.
I'm wondering, where did this, I know we touched on previously in terms of coloring outside of the box and not following the scripted textbook way of doing things, but it feels like you're really willing to go beyond what other people expect, what other people think. Where did that really come from? Like, aside from the 1% comment, it feels like it's a bigger theme in your life than that.
This is a journey. And as much as I want to avoid talking about myself as a leader, I really want to talk about the people and the work that we're doing. But when I really look back at it, I do think that I see things differently. I'm constantly pushing, even sometimes pushing myself into places that are super uncomfortable. Where did it come from? I think it's a combination of things. I talked to you earlier. I was moved to America when I was 18 from Canada. I've been all over the United States, living in different places. I have a lot of interests. I was a rapper till I was 16, and then I played basketball in college. So like the things that have brought me together in this role, I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to be a healthcare CEO. I didn't even grow up thinking I was going to be a physician. I think that has allowed me to not live in those boxes that I'm in. I don't see myself as a physician. I don't see myself as a healthcare CEO. When I'm out on the street, I'm just Moo. And Moo is complex and Moo is convoluted and a little different and a little weird. But I think accepting all of those things that I am, and then bringing them to my leadership role has really allowed a way to look at the world that's been very different than what Vituity has done in the past. And I think in the future, my hope is, one of the things I always say to everybody is that I want to create the CEO job. I want to put in the place where I'm no longer a great candidate. So I want to disrupt myself and the organization such that Moo would not be a good candidate when I decide to retire or they decide to get rid of me.
That's very cool. Thank you for sharing that response with me. And I want to know, for leaders that are listening across any industry, because we have so many leaders across so many different industries that tune in and listen to this show, how have you really designed a system that serves people that aren't all necessarily already on the same page or starting from that same place? Like, I could imagine that is such a challenge to bring that unity when you're being met with so many different perspectives and contexts.
Yeah, I think that's the key to leadership. I think that, I always say to my team, to myself, when somebody doesn't understand you, it's your fault. And that's a very hard concept for leaders to accept, right? What do you mean you don't understand me, And the reason I say that is that for all of these different people, different stakeholders, you're trying to bring 10,000, 12,000 people together towards a goal of helping people and doing what they love. You have to meet them where they are. You have to understand what's important to them. Listen, there are people in our organization that do it for the check. I mean, let's just be honest, right? And so then you got to make sure that the check is sufficient by which you can recruit good people. There are other people that you could pay them nothing. They just want to impact the world, and you have to appeal to them in that regard. So I think the key to leadership, if you're out there, is to really look at all your people and don't just say, hey, I want to get the right person. I think that's terrible. There is no right person. There's only moose out there, less than 1% people, and they all have different qualities, and they don't have this 7 habits of the highly effective people, which, by the way, there was another book that Stephen wrote after that, which is the 8th habit, right? I mean, so he wasn't even clear that there was only 7. But, there's so many different amazing, beautiful people in the world, in the country, in healthcare. It's really just accepting them for who they are. And then you as a leader have to figure out how to get to them. And it may mean that you have to change who you are in spots to be able to connect with them. But once you connect with them in their space, man, it's like cooking with gas. They really get it, and they'll do anything for the organization once they know that you're willing in your high role to be able to get on their level and connect with them in ways that they don't expect leaders to.
Absolutely. And particularly because Vituity is scaling nationally. And, this is where a mission can get so easily diluted. And this is almost an extension of what you've just shared, but I'm wondering, how have you preserved that closeness and connection to purpose whilst you continue to grow and scale?
One of my pet peeves is when I have people that will ask me within the partnership and external list, say, how do you keep your culture as you grow? And I always ask them a question back. I said, does that mean that our culture isn't out there already? That our culture is only unique to us? And I think the beauty of growth and scaling is that there's so many people out there who really want to do what we're doing already. So for me, it's not necessarily getting bigger and diluting a culture. It's actually going out in the world and finding people who have the culture and pulling them in. We've met so many amazing people as we grow. I think a lot of times when you look at it as sort of the Death Star from Star Wars, that you have to inflict your will on people, that's not the best way. Go out and find people who already fundamentally believe in what you believe, and then show them what you're doing. Show them what you're doing in the world. You don't have to worry about scaling. The bigger problem you have is how to stop all these people from coming to try to do the great work we're doing at Vituity. I think, the thing I tell people all the time is that, I don't sit around and think about what our culture is like. What I do sit around is, can we improve more lives, and can we help all these Vitans do what they love? And if I go crazy on those 2 goals, I don't have to worry about what the culture looks like, because I have people in here in the organization who will constantly focus on how to make, every day they're in the world better.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering, there's a lot of commentary to say, and to speak to this increase in, say, things like burnout in the healthcare industry. How do you really protect that integrity and humanity of work when there's constant changes to systems and there's new pressures, and that may then have a knock-on effect to the people within an organization? How do you manage that?
We just had an officer meeting this morning about that. And, we have wild and crazy officer meetings. There's no groupthink there. Everybody is debating with everybody. And I love that, because that's how you get the right answers. But, my question to them today was, if you are worried about compensation, there's a base compensation. You got to pay something, right? If people can't live. But above that, if you're worried about how much work somebody has as those reasons for burnout, then you're missing the mark, right? The truth is that when people are fulfilled, right? Don't look at engagement. Don't look at belonging. Look at fulfillment. When people are fulfilled, burnout's much harder. And I know as a parent, I am never satisfied as a parent. I have a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old, and I'm still to this day not satisfied. but wow, am I fulfilled? When I'm tired, when I'm overworked, when they were crying all night, when they were kids, when my son had seizures for a year, and I was still fulfilled. And so I think we need to move away from, I don't even like the term burnout. I'm trying to, if you're out there, please stop using, like the whole world needs to stop using that term, because it's really not the right term. The right term is fulfillment, and how we get people to do great work and help them. We have to facilitate them impacting the world.
It's such a powerful insight and almost an unexpected response coming from you. And I love that for so many different reasons, because in my profession and in what I've seen in speaking to so many people, burnout doesn't necessarily come from how many hours one has worked. It comes from the feelings and the internal experience that someone is having whilst they are performing their work, which is what you spoke to in terms of the concept of fulfillment. How do you then check in and ensure your team are fulfilled?
You actually measure it. So what we're doing is now we're migrating our engagement survey, or our what do you call it, satisfaction survey. We're migrating to fulfillment. It means you have to ask different questions. Are you fulfilled by the work you do? Do you wake up every morning worried, or do you wake up every morning ready to change the world? There are several different ways you can ask different questions that changes people's mind about what they're supposed to do, and move away from the idea that somehow you're going to be satisfied, because life, as you know, can be fulfilling, but not always satisfied. I'll tell you a quick story if I could. I did a podcast this week with Katie, and I get emotional, so I gotta be careful here. So I don't want to cry on TV. But Katie Hill, he is a young man, 25-year-old, who was a college football star. He was going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL, and he was driving 4 days before the combine, the NFL combine. He was in a car accident where his leg got trapped between a tree and the car. And so for 8 hours, he sat there with his leg trapped. They had to amputate his leg at the scene. It's, if you get a chance to check his story out, it's amazing. And like I said, we just did a podcast with him. He came to my office in Las Colinas here in Texas, and he was rolling on a wheel. When you have one leg that's on a sort of a roller, like when you hurt your knee or you hurt your leg. And so he sort of rolled in the office, and he said, "Dr. Tomlinson, I'm so sorry." And I said, "What do you mean you're so sorry? It's great to see you. This is 6'4". He's still muscular, huge, football player. And he said, I wanted to walk in here on my own. I was like, if you don't understand fulfillment after that, here's a guy who lost his leg that really, in some ways, has so little, but he has so much. And I think burnout is the opposite. It's when you have so much, but you think you have so little. So yeah, I think that if you're out there and you're trying to measure burnout, you're trying to measure fulfillment, you got to do things differently. You got to ask different questions. You got to put the onus back on people to convince them that the work they're doing is amazing, and not just, going through the motions.
It's such a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, for leaders that are listening to this podcast, to this conversation, if they took just one principle from your leadership playbook, what would that be?
Yeah, the one principle that, if you biopsy me on LinkedIn, you'll get nauseated with is just be a less than 1%er. Really don't pick winners and losers before the race is even run. Don't put people in boxes. Don't put yourself in boxes. I did a why sort of a why statement with Simon Sinek. He does these interviews, and of course he made me cry for like an hour. I was not happy with him. But my why statement, which I didn't know before I went through that with him, was to inspire people to be better than, to do the work necessary to be better than they ever thought they could be. And the only way you can do that is through challenging yourself, challenging others, not accepting the status quo, and being optimistic that you can change the world, and then never ever quitting.
It's so powerful. And this actually really leads into the question that I had next for you, which is, when you really think about legacy, when you really think about the mark that you really want to leave, whether it is to your people in your organization, to your industry, and to the world at large, what does that look like for you?
This is another question I feel I'm going to give you an answer that you haven't heard before. So the legacy I want to leave is to be forgotten. I don't want to be remembered. I feel like if I'm remembered, I haven't done my job. My goal is to make, Vituity so much better when I leave, the people that I've left, the leaders that I've left, the initiatives or whatever it is, that they are just soaring, and they look back and they're like, who was Mu? I don't even know who the CEO was back in 2025. I feel like if they remember me, then I was one of the greatest. And I don't want to be one of the greatest. I want to be on the trajectory to greatness, and we're not there yet. So, my kids might, that they got to remember me, hopefully my family remembers me. But as far as my mark, I don't want to be remembered. I just want to be one of the steps on the way to greatness. And somebody, when they're great, will look back, and I might be in the roster somewhere down the line, but I don't want anybody to say, oh, do you remember Mu, how amazing he was? Because that means that whatever's going on then is not as amazing as it is now. And I know that it can be better. And I hope to put the things in place so that it's way better then than it is now.
That was correct. I was not expecting that response from you.
I apologize. I'm disruptive, remember? So
I know. I love it though. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Tomlinson, we love to wrap up all of our interviews here at CEO Behind the Scenes with our signature questions. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what is one thing that you've changed your mind about recently, and why?
What I've changed my mind about recently is how to evaluate success. And there's a quote that I love, and I wrote about it in my first book, that success is not a snapshot. Success is a portrait, right? And so snapshots, right? You think about it, we take pictures of people and we say, be like this or be like that. And everything's static in that picture. But success is more like a portrait. Colors are changed. And if you're an oil painter, you know about this, right? You can erase lines, you can add new lines, you can emphasize things. You're constantly working on that portrait. So the idea that you can be successful is crazy. And I've realized that really recently, that success is not necessarily what you get, it's actually what you do.
So falling in love with the process seems to be a big theme for you. For leaders that really struggle to find that satisfaction or fulfillment with success that you spoke to earlier, how would you advise them to begin to think about that?
I think the way that, how can you change your mind about that goal that you have, that you achieve it, and then you say, now what, is to go back to the tenets, that I talked about earlier, which is wherever I'm at is not as good as the next place that I'm going to be. So I'm constantly driving to be able to get there. And I think that that's what leaders should do. But to answer your question, people have to do it to themselves. And I think that's where it's very difficult as leaders to be able to constantly challenge, constantly grind yourself. And that means that when you get, and you got to be careful because your teams want you to celebrate them. But when you hit that KPI, when you hit that, this year we grew by $450 million. Like, it's nuts. Like, it's amazing. And I have to stop myself to celebrate it. But immediately my mindset is like, what's next? What's next? What are we going to do next? Not necessarily that we're going to eclipse that number, but I have this constant grind to say, well, there's something different. Are we doing everything we can? Are we being as good to people as we can? Are we being as good to patients? Is the quality the best? Should we be going into different specialties? It's just constant spinning. So I think that's what I would push people is to just keep on disrupting yourself first. And then knowing what that looks like, then you can bring it to people. Then you can bring it to your organizations. But you got to, if you're not waking up every day wanting to be different, it's going to be hard for you to lead.
Constant evolution and refinement over time.
Keep painting that portrait.
Yes, indeed. And finally, I wanted to ask you, what is one belief that you haven't changed your mind about, a principle you'd stand by even throughout a storm?
Yeah, duty and responsibility. Listen, I don't love every aspect of my job. Parts of my job are difficult. Parts of my job frustrate me. But my duty is to show up and be the CEO. That's what I signed up for. And so I'll never give on that. I'm never going to be in a situation where in the moment I'm going to not be that person that I signed up for. I'd rather leave than be not fulfilling my duty. So that I'll never give up on that.
Dr. Tomlinson, thank you so much for joining us today. I have loved every moment of this conversation with you. Before we do wrap up, are there any final words or messages that you would like to leave our audience with?
I think just reiterating, thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing. I think for everybody out there, I would constantly push yourself to do the work to be greater than anyone thought you could be.
Such powerful words. Thank you so much for joining me. I've loved this conversation and I have no doubt that it's going to leave a lasting impact on everyone that has listened. So thank you very much for joining me. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and if you gained some insights from sharing Dr. Tomlinson's wisdom and experiences around all things healthcare, innovation, leadership, and beyond, then please be sure to share this episode with someone in your network, someone in your community who you know would really benefit from these insights. And also be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on CEO Behind the Scenes.